Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. This is Pat DiCerbo on the most fascinating podcast in the world. It's fascinating because of the people that are on the show. It has nothing to do with me. And today we're with Kenny Freeman. Kenny is originally from Louisiana, and he was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, and attended Tara High School. He went to college at LSU and majored in history and English literature. Kenny is and has been an entrepreneur, and he is a husband and father and a coach, and has been a coach for many years, from what I understand, and is currently coaching youth basketball. He's a community leader and a business leader in his industry. And welcome, Kenny. How
Thanks
you
for
doing
having me,
today?
Pat. Or as I would call you one time when you started this grasshopper, but I think with you now, you have exceeded. I'm not visual and everything on my podcast, but glad to be here. Glad you're doing
Thank you, Sensei.
this.
So that's funny. I originally met Kenny through a friend in common, Joe Leo, in New York City. And I said, Kenny, what do you like to do for fun? And he said, I have a podcast. And I said, you're kidding me. I've always wanted to do a podcast. And we spent the next 30 minutes talking about that.
We
And
did.
Kenny furnished me with a list of things to buy and gave me advice. And against the odds, here I am interviewing Kenny.
I mean, you have a producer now. I do it all on my own. I think you have a crack research team as well. So, but I'm happy for you, Pat. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. So when you were like a little kid, what are your earliest memories, Kenny, of growing up in Louisiana?
Well, for me, I grew up in Baton Rouge. I was born in Shreveport, which is in northwest Louisiana, but my parents moved to Baton Rouge. I say moved. My mother actually grew up here, and my father went to high school here and then ended up playing football for LSU. So they moved back to Baton Rouge, I guess, when I was 2. And I have 6 siblings, 4 sisters and 2 brothers. And really just they had a large yard. We were in a fairly new subdivision, which at that time was somewhat on the outskirts, I guess, of Baton Rouge. Now it's the dead center of Baton Rouge with the growth. But it was playing football in the front yard with kids on our street alone. Pat, we probably had 70 kids. And if you wanted to play football or basketball or kick the can or whatever, there were always kids around. Very safe neighborhood, the doors were unlocked. You just bebopped on into somebody's house and wanted to see if, Bill or Johnny or whoever was there. And so it was, and then playing with the siblings, having dinner with the siblings, I guess, where you're scrapping for things. And so it was, and then, going to elementary school, kind of developing friends at that point. Some are still good friends today from back then. So early childhood is that, I think, for the most part.
Did you go to grade school in Baton Rouge as well?
Yes, yeah. I was here when they moved back to Baton Rouge when I was 2 years old. So I went to grade school at a place called LaSalle Elementary. Went there
Mm-hmm.
through the 6th grade and then went to junior high at that point, which was Westdale Junior High. Both public schools. And then I went to Tara High. Tara High, when I started, my class, which graduated in '74, was the very first class. They just built Tara High School. I was destined to go to Baton Rouge High, where my parents went, and my older brother. I'm number 2 in the pecking order of the sibling. But they started Tara High not too far from us. And so that's where I ended up going. I was the first freshman class and the first one again to go all 4 years all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And then graduated from Tara High in '74.
Mm-hmm. Did you, was there any question as to where you were going to college?
Not so much for me.
Mm.
My older brother, actually, I'm gonna plug him just a minute here, Pat. My older brother wanted to go to Dartmouth, but because he one grade in the ninth grade that he had, from what I understand, held him back a little bit. He ended up going to Emory University in Atlanta and then became a Rhodes Scholar, and then went to UVA Law School. So the smarts clearly went to my older brother, and probably I have my other siblings are doing very well too. So, but I would say I never looked at colleges like he did. I thought, yeah, for the most part, I was going to go to LSU. I mean, it's local here. I was, you know, bred a Tiger, and I'm still proud that I graduated from LSU.
Hmm. Are you a football fan?
Yeah, again, my father played from 1949 to 51. He was actually the captain of the 51 team. And I remember, back to childhood memories, there were some friends that would come up from New Orleans and they had a motorhome. And we would all pile on the motorhome and drive to campus. And they actually had a section in the South End called the Junior Tigers. I guess they were cheap tickets, and that's where all the parents sent the kids to.
Mm.
But so I remember going there from the time I was at least 7 or 8, and probably up until maybe the pandemic. I would say I missed maybe 6 home games, and for almost 60 years. So,
Oh my
but I wouldn't
gosh.
consider myself a diehard.
Yeah, you have to one game. If you'd missed only one
Yeah,
game, that
yeah,
would be a
yeah,
diehard.
yeah, yeah. So, but I enjoy going. I mean, now my grandkids are going. And so it's still fun to go. We tailgate about my brother-in-law and my I guess both my brother-in-laws and the whole family and whoever wants to stop by. We tailgate about 100 yards from the stadium and put out a nice little spread, and people drive by and have a good time. And so we're quickly into the stadium before the game starts.
That's great. I have to stop by your tailgate the next time
Yeah,
I
come
go to a
on down. I mean,
game.
I know you've been to Tiger Stadium, right? I think you said that.
Probably 15 times, I would
Oh
think.
wow. Well, yeah, you do have to stop by. I'll give you next time you're coming down, which obviously the season just ended. I think we won the
Hmm.
high. I got won the Heisman Trophy.
He did.
Um, he did. He Jaden did well, but
If we just had a defense, Kenny.
we we don't. We did not. We did not at all. Uh, we lost 3 tough games to 3 good teams, but still the
Hmm.
defense was just I'm not going to say deplorable, but very porous, shall we say.
Right. Good word. So, how does a history major with an English literature degree become
Mhm.
a entrepreneur? What did you do out of college?
Well, with that, originally I had the intentions of going to law school. My older brother was thinking about it at that time. He ended up, as I said, going to UVA Law School. My grandfather had been a lawyer, but my grades, and you and I talked about this on your podcast. I guess my freshman year, I didn't realize you had to go to class that much. I
Mm.
just suddenly I had this new freedom and living in the dorm and just had joined a fraternity and was just, every night there was a party and I was part of the party. I probably was the dick of
Right.
the party.
The
So I
parties
had
were
to,
compulsive and the classes were
yeah,
optional.
especially at LSU. So I was told to sit out a semester and then finally, went back, got my act together, but just law school was out at that time. And actually, when I was right towards the end of or near graduating, I really had no job. I ended up at a Christmas party, a family Christmas party, talking to an individual who was a vice president at that time of a construction company here locally, an industrial construction company, and things were starting to boom in the Baton Rouge area. This was 1979, and we just talked, and he said, "Hey, you want to come work for us?" And I said, "Sure, I need a job." Marianne and I were getting married the next May, and so I ended up going to work for him. Didn't know anything about industrial construction, but I had worked some construction during the summers when I was in college and a little bit in high school. But this was clearly different, and went to work there. and started learning, and then eventually, in '82, things started to turn south, I guess, in the industrial market, at least here in Baton Rouge. So they called me in and said, hey, you go to Freeport, Texas for a couple of weeks. We had a little satellite office over there. Go for a couple of weeks, or you can take a layoff. Well, I didn't want to take a layoff. We had just bought a house, and I said, sure, a couple of weeks. I had been going to Freeport anyway. So 2 weeks ended up turning into almost 2 years. And Marianne got pregnant, and I realized they weren't going to bring me home. And so I came home and had no job and ended up going to work. Fortunately, my father-in-law knew a gentleman who was the president of a company called Petron Corporation, which was an industrial insulation company at the time here in Baton Rouge. And they needed somebody. And so I ended up going to work there. And in 1996, 95 actually, the owner became terminally ill and asked if several of us wanted to purchase it. And we did. We got together. And so he passed away in January of 96, and we ended up buying the company. So it wasn't so much entrepreneurship as it was just an opportunity of an existing company.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, we grew it to become not just insulation, but scaffolding and painting, I think, is most in our industry now have to do to survive. There's very few, I think, that do, at least in the South, where the industrial market's heavy, is just surviving on insulation alone. So, and that's where through that industry, where I met our good friend Joe Leo.
Mm.
So that's really how I got into, I guess, faith. I actually did a podcast one time on faith, Pat, on kind of my life of things that just, again, happened to be at a Christmas party, a family Christmas party with no job, and then through a conversation, got a job, and then just my father-in-law happened to be duck hunting with a gentleman that was running a company, and got the job there, and been started there in '84, and Jim and I sold, my business partner and I sold the company in December 31st, 2015. I'm still involved, but not I'm kind of weaning back, so to speak.
What does that mean? Are you down to 40 hours or?
Really a lot less. I mean, the company's in great hands. They're doing very well. We actually sold to a company called Brown and Root, which is a large industrial. They're located, their headquarters now is in Baton Rouge. They originally formed in Houston, and they're a big international firm. And so Jim and I knew the president, CEO, and the COO, and several others over there. And we looked around, and they wanted to get into our business. I guess it was a natural fit. So we ended up selling to them. And again, I'm still involved and sit on several boards locally, and I'm still involved in the National Insulation Association. Again, where I met Joe, and so it's more just helping where I can. They really don't need my help, but it's being, like I said, involved in the boards and in the community and things like that. So I enjoy it. I still enjoy being in the game, as I say.
Mm-hmm. What attracted you to leadership in your industry at the outset? Were you encouraged by someone, or did it evolve in some other way?
That's a great question, Pat. And I think I go back to my father maybe a little bit, where I look at my father. He was involved in the community. He was involved. He was president of numerous organizations here, and as I said, really at his eulogy, he didn't just join organizations; he rose to be the president. And I think it started with him. You look back at LSU; he was the captain, as I mentioned, of the 1951 football team, which you're elected by your peers. So they saw leadership in him, and I think he instilled that. And then I got involved a little bit around 1987, recognizing that you can't just stay within your company. If you want to learn things and grow, you need to you learn from other people, obviously, and their knowledge. And So I got involved at that point in I guess it was the Manpower and Education Committee with the Associated Builders and Contractors in the local chapter here in Baton Rouge, and started moving up within that organization, I guess, just serving on various committees and really enjoying it and seeing what benefit it was to employees and kids coming out of high school that weren't necessarily going to college. We were offering an opportunity for them to go get an education and a vocation, so to speak. And then from there, got involved in the insulation Aspects Association. There's a group out of Houston called the Southwest Insulation Contractors Association. I became involved in that in 96. And so 2000, maybe 2 to 4, I was president of that. I was president of the ABC local chapter in 1999. And then from, I guess, SWICA, which was the regional group, I got involved with NIA, again, the National Insulation Association. I served on that board and then was asked to get in the chairs there, which is, you become assistant treasurer and then rise through the ranks, and was president of that in 2016, and still serve. I'm still involved in that group and have served as a past president advisor. Joe actually asked me to be a past president advisor, which I was greatly appreciative of and proud to serve as his, past president advisor. And then LSU, I've been involved with a couple of, groups there. And then there's one that I've helped form called the Louisiana Construction Education Foundation, Pat, where again, we take, students that aren't necessarily wanting to go to college, but are looking for something. And they want whether they become a welder or a pipe fitter, an electrician, an insulator, whatever, we kind of give them scholarships to go get their education through a trade school. And so, because I personally, I'm really concerned about the demographics of our industry. We've got to figure out a way to get new people, in our industry. We're starting to see a few. But I want to go back 1 second, Pat, just to say, because I brought up Joe. We've talked about Joe Leo a couple of times, and I'm going to be not necessarily specific to Joe Leo, but Joe's a perfect example of this. That my company was a merit shop, a non-union company, and Joe's and many others on the National Insulation that are involved with the association are union contractors. So it's a mix of all. It's not just one or the other. And look, we all get along. When we walk into a room, we're trying to better the industry as a whole. We're not, we take our hats off, so to speak. And I think that's the beauty of at least the National Insulation Association is ultimately we're there to better the industry. We have our own committees, we have our own groups, and we continue every day to fight battles of trying to stay in the industry and stay relevant. But when we go there, we take off one hat and put on another one that says, hey, we're all here together trying to make the industry as best as we can. And I think that's very important to a degree. So, and I see the same thing, even at, say, ABC here locally, sitting on those boards in the committees. And when you walk in, these guys compete against each other every day. But when they walk in there, it's, hey, how can we better education? How can we get more people involved? What can we do? And I think that's refreshing to me that we can do that. And that's still going on in this country. It gives me hope.
Safety, mental health.
Yeah.
So you've talked about community, and you've talked a little bit about coaching to me recently, which is, I can hear it in your voice when you get excited about it. So tell me about your experience coaching youth basketball.
Yeah. It's actually my son and I coached the 8th grade at a school here where he graduated, Catholic high school. And so he played there and graduated in 2002. And the head varsity coach called me after the season I guess during the summer, and said, asked me if he thought John would be interested in coaching basketball. And I'm like, well, I'm going to call him. Why are you calling me? And then he called John and talked to him, and Catholic High is a little bit unique in that it's a high school, but it has an eighth grade, and here in Baton Rouge, and I mean maybe across the country, I really don't know, but it's kind of the middle school is sixth, seventh, and eighth, and so even though Catholic High has an eighth grade, we're playing against eighth graders from other schools, I guess. But they asked him, and he said, yeah, as long as it's the eighth grade. He just couldn't commit to anything else. He was starting college, joined a fraternity. He was a little bit wiser than me that he didn't party every night.
Mm.
And, had a girlfriend. And so I said, look, I'll help him the first year just because you're having to deal with parents and everything else. And then, an 18-year-old trying to deal with parents could be a tough thing, I imagine. So at the end of the very first season, I went and told the head varsity coach, I said, look, I don't care if he comes back or not. I'm in. I want to continue to do this. I really enjoyed it. I had coached him a little bit when he was younger and really enjoyed it. So that was 2002. We're going on our 22nd or 23rd year. I'm not really sure which. It's hard to keep up, but we're in the process now. Our season, our very first game is January the 3rd. And the uniqueness, I guess, about us, Pat, is that all these other schools that we play, these kids have been together for 3, 4, 5 years. We don't even know. So the kids that go to Catholic County 8th grade come from all these various middle schools. They only take a certain number. Originally, there was about 22 kids that we had to pull from, and now they're up to about 60. So we have a little bit greater numbers. But we go in October and say, hey, who's interested in playing basketball? And hope we have enough to field a team. And fortunately, the last several years, we've had quite a few go out to where we've actually had to cut. And they have a secondary team, so those that we cut still get to play on a secondary level. So and then to add to that, Pat, I was sitting in the stands our very first year watching, I think, the 9th grade game at Catholic High, and one of the coaches comes over and says, hey, the head varsity coach, Mark Estorage wants you to come run the clock, and I said, yeah, I'll learn at practice, and then I'll consider doing it. I said, no, we need you now. Well, I never run a clock in my life. So he said, I'll sit there with you, the whole 9th grade game, and I'll teach you, and so on and so forth. Well, he stayed about a half. And I knew the game, but still, when you're running a clock, it's an entirely different situation. I mean, you know when to start, stop. But so he left me about halfway through the 9th grade game, and the varsity game, I will never, ever forget, went to triple overtime. And I'm just literally sitting there. The coaches, both of them are yelling at me. I mean, it's like, you should have stopped the clock. You should have did this. You should have done that. But I managed to get through it. And, since 2002, I still run the clock for the varsity there. So I really enjoy being involved. I get basketball. I played football. I played basketball. I ran track. But basketball is just a fast game to me, and I enjoy it. It keeps me on my toes, shall I say.
Mm-hmm. That's great. How did you meet Marianne, your bride?
Well, she also went to Terra. She was a year behind me, and she was a cheerleader. So I played football. I was the quarterback on the football team. And I was actually dating another girl who happened to be a very good friend of hers who was in my class. And then when I got to LSU, we somewhat separated a little bit. So I was in a fraternity, and every football game we were having parties after the games. And so I needed a date. My roommate was dating another girl who was in that class. And he said, hey, what about Marianne Polito? And I said, sure. And so I called her up, and we went out and, kind of started dating after that, and ended up getting married. This was 74. Ended up getting married in 80 and have been married ever since. So it was really through that, the high school and but we didn't really start dating until I was in college. And again, we've been together since '74, so to speak. We got married in 1980.
Mm-hmm. And then John came along and
John came along in '84,
mm-hmm.
and then my daughter Jamie was born in '89.
Mm-hmm.
Both live here in Baton Rouge. John is married to Hillary and has 2 kids, Foster and Margot. And Jamie lives here now. She actually went to University of Central Florida, but moved back to Baton Rouge, and she lives here now too.
Do you have any hobbies in addition to the ones you mentioned?
I do play golf. I won't say I play it
Mm-hmm.
well, but I do play golf a couple of days a week now. I have a little group of friends that we go play and really have a good time, and so that's one. And then we have a condo down in Florida, in Perdido Key, Florida. I'm involved in that as well with the HOA. I'm the president of the HOA there, so I go down there quite a bit. Having it's a fabulous building, but still it needs work like everything else, and so sometimes you have to go down and look at things and make decisions on what needs to be done. But we have a great group of people on that as well, and the lady that manages that building fantastically. So, going to Florida, enjoy the beach. We're actually going to head down there for New Year's and spend New Year's. The family will spend New Year's down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then traveling a little bit. I really enjoy traveling, Pat, when I go to various places, say for business, or used to anyway. I would try and say if I was we have a contract with a little refinery up in Kansas, and so when I go there, I might try and go by. If I had time, I may spend a little time going to see the University of Kansas or Kansas State University, just go on their campus or Oklahoma. We used to have one in Oklahoma. I remember going to Oklahoma State's campus or University of Oklahoma. So I like to visit campuses of colleges if I'm there, just to get a feel for them. And
Mm-hmm.
then if one of my probably goals is I want to visit some of the Civil War parks.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly up in that. I guess they're most kind of in the north as opposed to the. I've been to some in the south, but really more Gettysburg and some in Virginia. That I'd like to go see, kind of being back to that
Mm-hmm.
history aspect of things. So just that would be one I think that I really want to start doing now that I have a little more free time.
Mm-hmm. How did you get involved in podcasting?
It was what sparked my idea for podcasting was 2 things. One, again, you got 7 kids that my father passed away, I think 12 years ago now, and my mother remained in the house that they built and we all grew up in. And she was in her late 80s, early 90s. She passed away 3 years ago now. But it was, we finally convinced her she needed to move out of this house. This was a pretty large house, and she really didn't need to be there by herself. And so we started to come together. It was about a year-long process we were all tasked with different things, the siblings were, on how to divvy up the assets. And so we came together, and I've actually been wanting to do a podcast on this. Again, this is what spurred me on a little bit. I am going to do it soon, but just sat there and said, here's 7 siblings that have come together and did it in what I consider the right way. So I said I wanted to do one on a podcast on that. And then secondly, I guess, Pat, my business partner, Jim Hall, lost his wife in a tragic car accident. My brother-in-law lost his wife to glioblastoma, and another good friend of mine lost his wife to cancer that it had lingered with her, been with her about, I think, 13 or 14 years. So I came up with an idea of saying, here's Jim, who lost his wife, in an accident, never really got to say goodbye. Here's, Ronnie, who had 5 years knowing with Sharon that, he got time and he got to see her, and then Roger, for 13 years. So I said I wanted to get the different perspectives on, how it was, because I mean, typically we have the women on that lose their husbands. I wanted the husbands on that had lost their wives and really give their stories. But when we got closer to it, they one of them, I'm not going to say who, one of them just decided it was going to be too tough and did not want to do it. So I respected that. But then I said I still want to continue with the podcast, so I ended up researching, buying equipment. Again, I could pull my microphone down here like I'm showing you that I do, my headphones that I do. And the very first one I did was defunding the police. There was the big movement going on at that point, so I had two gentlemen on, one actually a past police chief of Baton Rouge and another with an opposing view, and said, okay, after that one, hey, I can do this. And the next one I did was through somebody giving me an idea why men wait until it's too late to go to the doctor. So I reached out to my doctor, and he agreed to come on, and been doing them ever since. I just started lining out kind of topics that I wanted to do. I don't have a set theme, as you know. It's really what I've done several on music. I just did one, like I said, on prostate cancer and what the Blue Ribbon Soiree, which is a fundraiser for prostate cancer. One I did before that was on places that no longer exist in Baton Rouge, which I highly recommend to you to look at Albany. And you've lived there a long time, and start looking at places that were iconic places that were there that may no longer be there, and just talk about it. And then people, and I ask people to send me, places that they remembered, and it just starts to snowball. So I enjoy it. I mean, I'm lining up a doctor in Atlanta after the first of the year, and now people recommend to me, hey, you ought to think about this or that. I've done child seizures, holistic nutrition. I've done a list of things that don't necessarily mesh together, but I enjoy doing them. I think they're relevant topics, and I think my original idea, Pat, was to do extraordinary people, which I think we're all extraordinary in our own way, and then maybe try and capture that. And then I started doing other things outside of that. So I've had several gentlemen on that won a pro athlete. One who played professional football and then is trying to start a school in Houston, or he started a school in Houston, trying to build a whole community in a desolate area of Houston, and wrote a book and had him on. So you ought to look at him, Coach Roy Nell Young. He played for the Eagles. Fascinating gentleman from New Orleans originally, and then is in Houston now, and his story is definitely worth you pursuing, I think. But I started doing it and enjoyed it, and I think just like you've done a great job. Once you start doing it, to me, it kind of gets in your blood, so to speak. And it's whether I have 5 people listening or 5,000, I'm happy to do it. I enjoy doing it. So, I mean, what spurred you besides, when you and I did it, I think you got the bug, maybe even a little bit before that. But what made you really want to get into it as well?
Well, you and I were talking, and I asked if you had any hobbies, and you said, well, yeah, I have a podcast. And I think I interrupted you. I said, I've always wanted to do a podcast. And I think you didn't believe me. You said, oh, you're full of it. And the reason is because in my database, I have roughly 16,500 people that are either owners of companies or CEOs. They're either directly or indirectly involved in entrepreneurship, management, manufacturing, distribution, transportation, shipping, design, or construction. So all these interesting people who have all done it their own way, and we've all done it, whatever it is, our own way. And I like to listen to Joe Rogan. I think he's a good interviewer, and I think he had a really interesting cross-section of people on his show. But like you, I feel like everyone has their own unique story. And that's why the title for me is the most fascinating podcast in the world. I was going to call it the most interesting podcast in the world, but believe it or not, there is another podcast out there
Oh, I believe
that
it. I
did
believe it.
like 10, they only did like 10 episodes, but my attorney told me I couldn't use that title. So I said, I substituted in fascinating.
Well, there you
And
go.
there you have it. So, you know, I think Joe Rogan's really good. I think there's lots of other great podcasters, but to a certain extent, when people get really famous, they tend to put a lot of their own opinions into the
Right. No, I agree with that.
and for me, you know, that doesn't work for me. Like, my opinion is irrelevant. It's only your opinion today. I think that's relevant and interesting. It's not that I don't have an opinion, but
Oh, I
for
know
our
you got
purposes.
opinions. I mean, again, you did one with me, and I thought it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I,
But
to go
you
back
let
to
me
what you
just tell my story. I'm
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
but I think that's what it is. And so, I distinctly remember. I mean, you called me up, because of your relationship with Joe Leo. And after
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes of talking, I said, Pat, I got to get you on my podcast. I mean, whether we do business or not is to me irrelevant. I mean, your story is fascinating, and people really need to know your story. And we only got about halfway through your story. So, and I think that's what I really wanted to. Part of mine was trying to capture that aspect of, again, individuals. But then I started saying, there's other topics that I find interesting too.
Like the one
Again, I
on
mean,
seizures was fascinating.
the child seizures, which
That
I've
woman is
actually,
incredible.
and she's started her own now. And but
Mm-hmm.
the child seizures led to the holistic nutrition. She was
Mm-hmm.
the lady I did there was out of Oregon. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've traveled to Virginia. I've traveled to Houston. I'll go wherever, DC. I'll go wherever to do the podcast. I'm actually hopefully going to be able to get on this doctor with prostate cancer. He's a world-renowned doctor doing research on trying to cure prostate cancer. And so he was down at Tulane for a long time, as I know you know Tulane well.
Mm-hmm.
And then now he's at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And so I'm trying to potentially get him on. Several people know him. I've not met him personally, but I think they're working on trying to get him on. And so for me, it's been people sometimes just recommending, hey, you ought to think about getting so and so on or whatever. And then I may read a book like your very first one was on an author. And I asked you, how did you get him on? You said you were at a I think a book show or something. And I'm sure, knowing you and your personality, just walked up and started having a conversation, or maybe you heard him give a talk in his book and you convinced him to come on. And it's been,
Mm-hmm.
I find when you tell people, hey, I got a podcast, so I might want to get you on. Some of them are willing to do it, and I think they're intrigued by it a little bit. But once you get them on, again, I go back to another one. I did one by a friend of mine who wrote a book called The Hoodlum Lawyer. He ended up discovering after the fact that his grandfather in Chicago was actually the lawyer for the mob and may have really run the mob in the Chicago area for a period of time. And so after I interviewed him, I flew up to Virginia where he lives and did my podcast with him, with Mark Jones. And Mark sent me an email about 2 days later and said, Kenny, you're a really good interviewer. I thought you were just going to ask me a question. So you wrote a book. Tell me about it. But I think, as you know, even when I did with you, preparation is a key to at least the ones like we do. I think preparation is a key. You started off, went to Terra High School and LSU, just knowing a little bit about that. But so I think it's not just for me. Even the one I had with Janie Nasca on the prostate cancer. I mean, I studied and I prepped and I made notes, and then you let the conversation, as you're doing right now with me, you ask a question and you let the conversation go where it may to a degree. So I think that's part of the fun that you and I may have in the way we do a podcast versus some others that are going down a strict line. I mean, you're right. Joe Rogan, I enjoy him too because he asks, I think, he can get really deep in his questions based on the conversation. And I think that's part of
Mm-hmm.
what I enjoy is, okay, I may have an outline of notes where I want to maybe take the conversation a little bit, but they may say something. And then at that point, I'm like, wow, okay, let's go down that path. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of freedom, I think, that we have that some may not have.
So one of the reasons I loved the one on seizures so much is I had read this book by David Perlmutter called Grain Brain,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about how gluten, in his opinion and research and experience, may be a contributor to brain disease. But then he also talked about how he's a gerontologist, but I think he also has a PhD in dietetics or nutrition. And he talked about these kids that come to him and they're having seizures, and he's able to modify their diets. And by doing that, minimize their seizures. He's someone you might want to talk to. David Perlmutter. He wrote
Okay.
at least one book, Grain Brain, and I think he wrote another more recent book. But and he talks about how the food has been modified in such a way that our body doesn't recognize it often, doesn't recognize it as food. And so he says that's where diseases like celiac or gluten intolerance have proliferated. It's not so much that people have changed, it's that the food has changed and our body doesn't recognize it as food.
So what he's really saying
So,
is, with all of the new technology and trying to inject this, make more food, so to speak, or kind of
mm-hmm,
hybrid foods that our bodies aren't. Yeah, and with her, back to the one that I did. I mean, once they changed her nutrition, as you well know, and got it more holistic, she doesn't have seizures
mm-hmm,
anymore. She was having literally 17, 18 seizures a day. Couldn't go to school. Um,
mm-hmm,
and now changing her diet, it has really had a major impact. And so I think people need to look at it. I've had a couple of people reach out to me and say, "Hey, do you mind if I reach out to Kamisha?" And I said, "Let me ask her." And sure enough, she's more than happy to talk to anybody about it. Now she's formed her own uh, company based on the same thing. She will meet with you and your child, if you have a concern. And she takes tests and will send the testing off to get information back on maybe what they're allergic to or whatever, and then start developing a plan. Now she works with doctors. She's not alone in this, but she went through schooling to get this kind of certification. So I think
mm-hmm,
if there's, and they had gone literally all over the place, Pat. And I think that's a little bit. I'm not going to go into the medical field because I'm having
mm-hmm,
my own little issue with the medical field
mm-hmm,
and how it works. At least how I'm seeing it work. And that was the same with them. I mean, I think doctors, kind of going back to Jefferson Airplane, one pill makes you smaller, one makes you large, that type of thing. And I
mm-hmm.
think it's just, oh, you have this, here's a pill, instead of really diagnosing what the issue may be to a degree, or because they're
Mm-hmm.
so rushed now. And I think that's why more and more doctors are moving towards this concierge type of practice where they can spend time with the patient and really talk to the. I mean, we need to know. I know you don't want to go
Mm-hmm.
down that path, but you brought up the child seizures, so
I mean, I don't mind. I think there's so many good doctors out there that are, and what we've done to them as a society and as a government is just terrible. We've told them that they are overpaid and they don't deserve the money they make, and then we've told them give up on prevention and treat everything with medicine, and the treatment protocols have been shaped by others,
right,
you know,
exactly.
the big business. But
We won't go
I
down that
don't
path,
know.
but I mean we can. But no, you're right. I think we can. It's you said it well. I mean, I think it has been shaped by big business, and I just don't think that a lot of them, unfortunately, have the time and that's the two that I've done so far medically. Specifically, one that I did on she's a holistic therapist, physical therapist, was in that rat race and just said that, she'd have maybe 20 minutes, and you really didn't get to spend time with the patient, so to speak, before and the insurance company's like, you got to go to the next one. The facility she
Mm-hmm.
worked in, you got to go to the next one, you got to go to the next one. And so she just sat back
Mm-hmm.
and said, this is not the way she wanted to practice. So she
Mm-hmm.
stepped back, and now she's kind of she has a concierge practice of her own.
Mm-hmm.
She limits the patients that she sees. She only does females. I wish she did males, but because I'm into acupuncture now, Pat, as you know. I think I mentioned that to you, and that really works for
Mm-hmm.
me. But she's happy and content and has quality lifetime with her kids and so on and so forth. And so I think some of these doctors get stressed out so early on because it's just trying to satisfy everything. Like you said, the big push from the big business, so to speak. They just don't have time to get to know people. Fortunately, I've been going to mine for 30 plus years, and he has a concierge practice. So I know him
Mm-hmm.
personally, and he takes time now he went from, I think, 1,500 patients down to 300 maybe, or 400. So he really, when he decided to go to his concierge practice, and so he really culled it down and has time. Before he's sitting there at his keyboard, so you feel a little bit, he's plugging stuff in, says, okay, take a pill, let's go. And now it's, how's Mary Ann? How are the kids? And it just back to, what do we need to talk about? I think
Mm-hmm.
we need to get back to that.
Amen. So what's next for you? So as you talk about winding down
Well, we are
from your
taking the whole family. We're going on when I say whole family, this is Mary Ann's. Mary Ann's 100% Italian, has traced both her grandparents came from Sicily. Um, so we are all going to my kids and grandkids, and several of her siblings and their kids and grandkids are all going to Italy next summer. Not all going to be in the same place at the same time. We're all going to meet up in Sicily. I don't really know the agenda that much, Pat. I'm just like, hey, tell me when I need to go, and I'll show up. But I know we're going to Marianne. I've already been to Italy, not to the extent that you have. I mean, you're the traveler, the world traveler. But so we're all going. That should be fun. And then again, I want to start going to visit some of these. Not just Civil War. Maybe I've been to Boston several times, but maybe the Revolutionary War sites as well. But those pique my interest. Just you can read about them, but until you really go there and see it and feel it, I don't think you have an appreciation for it. So I want to start maybe traveling a little more there. I think I have about 6 states to go before I hit all 50. So I want to, and that may be another reason I want to go see Dr. Sauter in Minnesota, is I could probably knock out the 4 states in that area that I have not been to yet. And continue to coach. Like I said, we're starting our season right after the first of the year. I used to snow ski quite a bit. I've done that maybe 3 years ago. I think we went to snow ski, the family. I used to go with a group of guys every year, and haven't done that much anymore. So and actually, Pat, believe it or not, I'd like to go maybe ski one time on the East Coast. I've done California, I've done Colorado, I've done Utah, I've done New Mexico, but I've never done Vermont or New Hampshire. What, you got any places to recommend?
Well, there's 2 great mountains in New York, actually, Gore and Whiteface. They're state-owned and they're very reasonably priced. And Whiteface, as you may know, is where I think it was 1980 Olympics were,
Mm-hmm.
80 or 84, when the Miracle on Ice
Yeah,
and the U.S. beat Russia. So that's
yeah.
Lake Placid's a really neat town. As you may recall, I do triathlons and I've done that one like 5 times. I really like Lake Placid, the village, and it's just a great place. It's a great mountain, whether you
Mm-hmm.
go in the summer or the winter. I assume if you're going to ski, you're going to go in the winter.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but it's just a spectacular. It's windy, It's definitely Eastern skiing. But then, like in, I think it's Maine, Sunday River, in Vermont, you've got Stowe, Killington, Smuggler's Notch, Jay Peak. There's just tons in New Hampshire. I forget the ones in New Hampshire, but I can make a list for you for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the runs aren't nearly as long as some of them you have in, say, Utah.
Right. No, nowhere
But
near.
I think it'd be. I just would like to do it and say that I've done it. It's a little bit of a goal of mine
Mm-hmm.
to go maybe ski on the east side. I've never done it. Like I said, I've been to quite a few in Utah and Colorado, uh, California.
If you're
So
if you're gonna do it, in my opinion, you might want to keep going north too, even though I'm not a big skier, so I'm not sure. But like in Canada, just due north of Montreal is Mount Tremblant. I think
hmm
it's the Laurentian Mountains, maybe.
okay.
And that's worth seeing too. It's beautiful. I've never skied there, but
I mean, I
I've
love
done
Montreal, so
triathlons there,
that's a great city.
no doubt. So, is there anything that you might like to talk about that we haven't already talked about or say to me?
No, again, I think I'm proud of you. I'm proud. You seem to enjoy it. You do a good job. Like I said, you
Thank
have
you.
gone way beyond where I have. You're doing the video part of it now as well. But you have a
Hmm.
producer. You have your crack research team. No,
Hmm.
look. I just if you've got an idea that you want to do, if you have a passion for something, I think not you. I'm talking to the masses here, I guess, to a degree. Go do it again. I never thought I'd get into coaching basketball, but here I am
Hmm.
23 years later, and I'm doing it with my son. I mean, I love that's an aspect. And John brings Foster to the gym when we practice. My little 7-year-old grandson, he plays basketball. He coaches him in his little league. Um, and he brings him to the gym, and all the players get to know Foster, and he gets to know them. And so I think that I enjoyed it one year. I think being involved, Pat, has been, as you know, and you are. I think being involved and trying to make a difference has been for me satisfying and gratifying as well. Whether I have or not, I don't know, but I think the relationships that you make again, Joe Leo and Dorothy in New York, and Steve and Elaine Luce in Chicago, or I could just go on down on the list of people that just through the National Installation Association, that become good friends. I mean, I've been there. Dave Cox. I have to give Dave Cox a shout out. He will see. He's also an NIA. He lives in Charlotte. I want to get him on because he's a fascinating character.
How
But
so?
and I think you've reached out to Laura Dover. So Laura's president right now. But it's the
Hmm.
relationships that you make, and like I said, I've been in Tiger Stadium, sitting there at a football game, and I'm sure it's nationally televised, to where Joe Leo is texting me, are you there? What's going on? Type of thing, and that just that's nice, that you have that you build those types of relationships. You don't just I guess for me, Pat, there's a lot that when I started getting involved with NIA, you see a lot of the gentlemen that become president or ladies that become president, and they usually retire and they move on. I, for some reason, got to figure out how to move on. I can't, but then I don't want to. In other words, they're not
Hmm.
involved anymore, but I'm still involved. I still go to meetings. I still go to the board meetings because I have a right to as a past president. If I'm a past president advisor, I'm obligated to go or encouraged to go. But I still feel I have a worth of trying to help the association and help people, so to speak. So I think find your passion and then go for it. I guess would what I would say. So podcasting for me has been one of them. I
Hmm.
never thought 3 years ago I'd do a podcast, but I started doing it. I started researching. I read a couple of books on it, and again bought the equipment. I have, yeah, you know what I have because I sent it to you. It's about $3,000 worth of equipment. Um,
Hmm.
Still gonna try and figure out how to do the video. Now I know until you get Rich involved, but um, and so it's I enjoy it. I want to continue this. I want to continue to
Hmm.
interview people. I want to continue to do subjects. One I'm going to do in the near term is also I'm an audiophile in a sense that music fascinates me. Music,
Hmm.
when we grew up in the 60s and 70s and these bands and how, I never knew until a while ago, and I don't want to bore people, Pat, but I'm going to do one on this about how maybe, again, I look at the Yardbirds that morphed into Led Zeppelin. How did that come about? Or band members that left one band to go to another band, or bands disbanded, or somebody left, and where would that band be? I mean, you look at Brian Jones with the Rolling Stones, but the Rolling
Mm.
Stones replaced him with who? Eventually, Ronnie Wood, who was in Faces, with who was the lead singer of Faces, Rod Stewart. I can go on. So I want to do something
Right.
about a podcast about that music is always intrigued me. I can't tell you
Well,
where I
it's
was yesterday, but I can tell you who the drummer of the Stones was, or the Who, or whatever. So
well, there was an announcement in the paper. I was thinking about this very topic yesterday because I saw an announcement that the founding drummer of AC/DC had died.
yeah, he passed away.
He's
He passed
77
away.
years old. And it was obvious from the article that he was a founding drummer, but not a long-lasting drummer.
Right.
They kicked him out of the band for drinking, if you can believe that.
I cannot believe that. Maybe he wasn't doing
Uh,
drugs. Maybe he was doing
because
alcohol instead of
he,
drugs.
he was drunk on stage. So Angus and
Oh wow.
Malcolm, I guess, got upset with him. But the Bon
Yeah,
Scott. I
but
mean,
things
I don't
like
know.
that.
Come
I
on.
mean, again, I look at the way the Stones really formed, even though it was Brian Jones, what happened to be, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger standing on a train platform waiting for a train to come. And I'm giving away half of my podcast here, but Keith Richards, they had actually been elementary. They lived in the same neighborhood when they were elementary school, and then Mick Jagger moved away. They hadn't seen each other until this point, and Mick Jagger had a couple of blues albums he was carrying, and Keith Richards saw it, and that sparked a little conversation. And wow, here comes the Rolling Stones. So, yeah, and they're still together. I mean, we're talking 62, 63, 64, and at least those two of the original founding members, they're still together. The
Mm,
Beatles, I did one on the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. I took 10, what I considered, and I did it with two of my buddies. And for me, the Beatles were it. I mean, just the amount of music that they put out in a short span. But then why
hmm
did they split up? So
right.
I just want to do
But
one on that.
I
Go
love
ahead.
to hear Mick Jagger talk about the Beatles because, apparently there's at least a small rivalry, him and Paul McCartney. And someone said, why the rivalry between you and Paul McCartney? And Mick is so smooth. He says, there's no rivalry. The Beatles don't exist. The
Yeah,
Stones are still a band.
he's absolutely right. He's
But
absolutely
he's
right.
just
But
got the best one-liners ever. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, and he's better
yeah,
than Bill Clinton.
and he's very smart. He's very. I mean, I've seen the Stones several times, but I hadn't seen them lately. But
Hmm.
um, even Bruce Springsteen was on the cusp of not shutting it down, because it was at one last album that he did, the very first one that really
Hmm.
took off, that the record companies were saying, God, if you don't hit it, you're not. And then all of a sudden, boom, he takes off. But back to
Mm.
the Beatles, getting the Stones, before Keith and Mick were really starting to write their own music, they were struggling. They didn't want to do renditions so much, even though they
Right.
loved the blues. The Beatles actually gave them several songs to, for
Yep.
them to perform and record. So yeah, there was a
Yep.
rivalry, but the majority of it, to me, the ones that I really love for the most part, started out in England. They're not, I'm thinking of who are the great American rock and roll bands. I mean,
Well, I do have a quick story. It's not
sure.
new, but you may not have heard it. It was about Glenn Fry talking about how he learned to write music.
Hmm.
And he lived in an apartment where Jackson Browne lived in the
Yeah.
basement
Yeah.
apartment, and the Eagles lived on the first floor. And he said every morning Jackson Browne would get up early, and Glenn Fry would hear the teapot whistle, and then there'd be some preparation of some sort, and then Jackson Browne would sit down at the piano for the next 2 hours and be playing notes and pausing, writing, playing notes, and so on and so forth. And then 2 hours later, you'd hear the teapot whistle again. And that was break time, apparently. And then back to the piano. And he said, that's how I learned to write music. And what I learned about music is there may be a lot of inspiration, but it's just really hard work. Just every day, getting up, writing on a schedule. And it reminds me of Pressfield in The War of Art when he quotes Somerset Maugham in an interview where Somerset Maugham, the famous poet, is asked, do you write only when inspired, Mr. Maugham, or do you write on some sort of schedule? And he said, I write only when inspired, which happens to be at 9 a.m. every day.
So I'm gonna
but I feel like bands are entrepreneurial. They're very entrepreneurial.
Absolutely. And go ahead.
And they're inches from certain death and sleeping on someone's couch, and they just need a break, and they're about to run out of money, and all of a sudden something happens. And I love watching band documentaries. It's great. Tom Petty was.
So who did Glenn Frey back up as a singer before he even got to California?
Linda Ronstadt.
No, that was when he got to California. Bob Seger.
All right, okay.
Bob Seger in Detroit. He's originally from Detroit, and then he moved. Bob Seger. He was playing guitar and was a backup singer with Bob Seger, and he encouraged him to. So he went out to California, and that's where he and Don Henley became backup for Linda Ronstadt, the Stone Ponies, and then they decided they wanted to break out and form their own band, and they did. Voila, the Eagles. Those are the stories that I find fascinating, and that's why I'm saying I want to do.
You could have a talk show on that. You could literally have a talk show. It might be 3 or 4,
but it's things like that I really want to. People have no idea, and maybe they don't.
No, and you're so inspired and so knowledgeable. I mean, I'm not knowledgeable, but I'm inspired.
No, but and I'll give you one more, which I think is really fascinating. Is you go back to Stevie Winwood. When he was in, it wasn't John Mayhall. What was the name of that? See, this is where I'm going to get a little. It was in England, and he was the organist and the singer. His brother Muff Winwood was a bass player, but he was too young to go into the bar, so they would have to sneak him through the back door when they were having a concert or a gig. It wasn't a concert at that point, in these bars. So Stevie Winwood was literally 15 years old up on stage in a bar playing music, and nobody had a clue that he was 15 years old at the time. But that's where he honed his craft, and then he went on to form Traffic and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
right.
And
the Beatles, when they did all those concerts in Germany, right?
Yeah, well, that's where they really honed their skill. I mean, that's when they became ultimately
the 10,000 hours.
Yeah. And then a lot of them moved out of England for tax purposes. The Stones, Exile on Main Street. I mean, they didn't want to pay taxes, and then I could go on for hours. That's what I want to do. And I can go on for hours on that type of, I mean, to me, one of the greatest of all time, Pink Floyd. You go look at, how Dave Gilmour ended up being in the band when Syd Barrett would just stand. He was so drugged out, he was on stage and he wouldn't even look. He was just sitting there, he wouldn't even lip sync, so to speak. So they finally had to move him out. And I just look at where Pink Floyd ended up. Where would they be if Syd Barrett was still the lead guitarist and singer versus Dave Gilmour? Might have been an entirely different band. I don't know. I can only speculate. But so those stories just fascinate me. And now you've got, and I'll leave it at this, but you've got, Pink Floyd, you've got the two leaders now. They ain't talked to each other in 25 years. Except for one time they came together for Live 8, which was for played a set, and then they haven't talked since. So it's like you're saying, you're steps away from, bankruptcy and everything else, or death. I mean, all of that, but some of them hit it big. And then you think about all the ones that don't, that struggle every night to try and hit it big.
Oh, yeah. But 99.9%.
Yeah, but they enjoy doing what they're doing. So I love the guys that are still our age that are keeping going too,
Yeah, I think it's great. So one last question. I'd love to ask this question. But the most important punctuation in our lives is the hyphen. That's what's between our date of birth and our date of death.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you want people to know about you if you're no longer here or when you're gone? What did your life stand for?
It's a tough question, Pat. It's a great question, but I think just that that I tried to make a difference. I became involved to make a difference. I won't say I became involved to make a difference, but once I got involved, I realized that you can make a difference, and so I hope to people sit back and say through his involvement that he did make a difference, again through education, giving kids an opportunity through the various foundations and associations I'm involved with. A quick story, Pat, and I know we've got to wrap it up, but so through this Louisiana Construction Education Foundation, we gave a donation to a high school between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and it was to establish their electrical program for high school kids. And I remember we were at the presentation, and this mother came up to me and said, "You don't know what y'all have literally saved my child." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said he was struggling. He's not going to go to college. He got into this program, and now he's found his calling. He knows what he wants to do. That, I think, just resonated with me when it stuck with me. It wasn't me personally. It is a group effort. We're all in this together. It wasn't Kenny Freeman alone. But if we come together and we have a common purpose, I think we can make a difference. So I'm just one little small microcosm of trying to make a difference, and hope that I did, Pat.
I love it. And I feel the same way. Like, obviously this isn't about me, but like, I feel like there's so much tension. We ask our high school kids, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Well, I'm going to go to this college. And then what are you going to do? So at 16 or 17, they're supposed to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives and what the vehicle is to get there. Well, I'm going to go to Harvard and I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. How do you know? Well, someone told me I was really smart when I was 12 and that I should be a neurosurgeon. So I go through my whole life from age 12 and on. I'm a neurosurgeon. What are you going to do when you grow up, Pat? I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. It's terrifying. These poor kids,
So maybe we need to let kids be kids, Pat.
Yeah, and all people just take the pressure off. Like, It's okay to make mistakes. And I love to tell the story about my good friend's mom when we were kids. She was like a professional level roller skater, and we would go to the Rollerama and skate. Just she and I and him. I'm like 15 or 16, and inevitably she would fall down in the first 5 or 10 minutes when we were there. And I said one day, "Mrs. Daly, why, you're such a great roller skater, why do you fall down?" And she says, "I got to fall down early. It keeps me loose." And I was just like, wow, that's great. Because then she's not worried about falling down. And I feel like that's a great metaphor for life. Like, I got to be willing to fall down over and over and over. And knowing me as you do, you know that I make a lot of mistakes.
No.
But that's how I learn.
Well, even podcasting,
that's how I learn.
I think we have to. Yeah, you're right. And I'll give you one of my famous, not my famous, one of my most interesting quotes is Gahil Gibran and Sid Hartha. You can learn more from the path of a worm than you can 1,000 books. So, back to even your roller skating. I mean, she could read all the books in the world about how to roller skate, but until she actually did it and fell down, even though she was professional, she had to fall down. Like you said, she's learning from even that one falling down, so to speak. So I think for me, that's kind of a metaphor in itself that, you can read all you want. God, you and I both love to read. I know that.
Yeah.
But still, until you do it and experience it and live it. Again, I've read all these books about Gettysburg and others, Manassas, but I want to go experience it and live it, walk on those grounds, and just, maybe I'll have no feeling, but I gotta believe I will have some.
Everybody who goes.
Yeah.
Everybody who goes. And I know lots of people that have read all about the Civil War and Revolutionary. I think a lot of business people do for some reason. And then they go and they say, "Have you never been?" "Oh, you have to go."
Yeah.
Just the scale of it. It's just massive and overwhelming, and they cry and they talk about what it must have been like. And then, of course, there's someone narrating oftentimes telling you what it was
Right.
like. They had no shoes. It was 30 degrees out. It was raining for 2 weeks. And you're like, how did they, 2 weeks, no shoes, rain, 30 something degrees? I mean, it's just, everybody is moved deeply, I think.
Well, that's what I intend to do, is to get moved when I go there. And so I want to experience those things. So, yeah, that's still one of my goals in life, and I'll get there. I have the time.
That's a long answer to the hyphen question.
I never give short answers, Pat. You ought to know that by now. That's probably something that I need to work on. But I'm not gonna. I remember I did one podcast where I asked an individual question. It's just yes, no.
Oh,
and
no.
I'm like, oh, I got to. So I would have to lead, the conversation basically with long questions to kind of explain, what. But yeah, that was a tough one, and that was a dear friend of mine, but ended up fine.
Thank you for making it easy.
Well, thank you for doing this. I mean, again, I think you have found you are a natural at this. You have, you're such a great interviewer of asking questions anyway. You know how to dig deep, and you listen very well. I think that's a big thing on a podcast, is you have to listen. Again, for me, it's okay. I have kind of an agenda as far as an outline, but then when you're listening to the answers, it may take you in a different place than that you thought you might go as the podcaster, so to speak. So I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you for doing this, and I think you're great at it too. So keep it going.
Thank you. Thanks for being on, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
You got it, Pat. Thank you.
All right, brother. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.